I'm going to perform a number of exercises that illustrate the capabilities of the browser, and principally that mixture of layout with HTML, styles with CSS, and the manipulation of one or both of them using JavaScript. We're going to do 5 exercises, as you can see here on this window. We're going to create a shape, first declaratively using HTML, then programmatically using JavaScript. We will then create a larger number of these shapes using a loop and placing them in random locations. We will add to that on number 4, variation of colors, and ultimately we will do an animation simulation in simply one axis to illustrate the capability to do that. I should also note that I have 3 windows open here. You can see on the upper left here, it's the browser. On the lower right, you have the file system, and you can see there 5 corresponding files to the exercises that I just listed. And then in the background is VS Code that we will use as an editor to perform these exercises. We will start off with the sample code that was used in class to start off with a very simple basic shape. So I will start off by dragging and dropping the first file onto the editor. As you can see here, this file is empty. I'm going to go ahead and delete the comments that are there. I'm going to go ahead and make my font a little smaller. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and go to the lecture slides and copy the starter code. So we can see here, this is the shape that we defined. Let me go ahead and make sure I can grab all of that. Okay, now that I got it, I'm going to go ahead and copy it onto the editor, and it looks like I missed it. I'm going to go ahead and save the file, and now I am going to drag and drop the file onto the editor. And since we will not be using this anymore, I'm going to go ahead and do it directly. I can go ahead and change the color and the size, and that will be reflected right away within the browser. So this was the basic, simple example where we created a tag, an HTML tag, and we defined all of the attributes of that shape by the following that you see here listed. So the z-index position, the absolute position, the horizontal placement, vertical placement, height and width, and also the border radius, which in this case makes it appear round because the default shape is squared. Okay, so that was the first exercise, a very simple, straightforward, declarative definition. And now we're going to do the same, but we're going to do it programmatically. So let's go ahead and close this file. I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop file number 2 onto the editor. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the comments here. And now to start off in the file, I'm going to add a body tag. And I'm going to use this body tag as a placeholder where I will add the shape that I'm going to create programmatically. So within these tags here, inside of it, I'm going to append a child, and I will do that programmatically. I need to start off by creating a script tag. So you can see here, this will denote the beginning and end of the code that I'm going to write. And inside of here, I'm going to do the exact same thing we did before when we wrote it on an HTML tag. However, we're not going to do it programmatically. And so I'm going to start off by creating a div placeholder into which I will add an instance of an HTML document. And we do that by entering document.createElement. And to this, we give a name. In this case, I'm going to call it div. And that defines the element that we're then going to add styles to, much like we added the style onto the HTML before. If you see, here's the style, and the rest of it are the attributes. We're going to do the same. However, we're not going to do it programmatically. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to give it an ID. All of these properties, as you can see there on the type ahead, are noted. In this case, I'm going to enter math.random, and I will do the same thing for a long list of numbers. This is just in case you want to do a very high number of IDs and to make sure you don't have any collisions that the browser would complain about. So that defines my ID. From here on out, I will do the same thing as before, except that I will use the style tag. Let me put that onto my clipboard. And the very first thing that we're going to do is Z index. I'm going to make it 5. The next thing that I'm going to do is the position. We want it to be absolute, so we can place the shapes in a specific location based on the coordinates that we enter. Then we're going to set our horizontal and vertical position. First horizontal at 0 pixels. Then the top, which denotes the vertical. I'm going to do the same. The next thing that we're going to enter is the width and height. So let's enter width first. And we're going to make it 200 pixels wide. Then we're going to do the same thing with the height. And we're going to make it 200 pixels high. The next thing will be the border radius, and we use this to make it round. Let me go ahead and enter that. And then the last thing is the background color. And so here, the property that we want is background, and the color we're going to give it is red. So there we've done the same thing that we did before when we did it within HTML, except we're now doing it programmatically. The last thing that we need to do is we need to append this element that we created onto this body tag. The way we're going to do it is that we're going to get a handle on the body tag, and we can do that by language features that are part of the browser. We need to get access to the document, then get a handle on the element. In this case, we're going to use the method getElements by name, by tag name, this one. And then we're going to enter the name of the tag, which in this case is body. We want the first instance, as there could be more than one. There generally isn't, but there's nothing limiting the writer or the author of the document from doing that. And then we're going to append a child element. In this case, it's going to be the div that we just created. And that completes the creation. Now let's go ahead and load it onto the browser. I'm going to go ahead and drag over to, and as you can see there, we have our shape. We can change the color. Let's make it green here. And if we reload the page, you can see there that we have green. So the very same thing that we did before, except initially we did it using a layout element HTML. And on the second one, we're doing it programmatically, then hooking on to this tag here, the body tag, and adding the div that we just created, as you can see. So that is all for the second exercise. On the next one, we're going to create a large number of these. Let's go ahead and move on to the third exercise. I'm going to drag and drop the file. As the comments note, we're going to create the same shapes we did before, except now we're going to do a large number of them in random locations. So we need the same code from before. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this onto this document. I'm going to delete the comments. As you can see there, I still have the body tag. I have the script we just wrote. However, we now want to write a loop. And so let's start off by writing the for loop. The very first part of the for loop is the initial condition that we're going to have. and the counter that we're going to use in this case is I, and we want to initialize that at 0. We're going to continue this loop as long as I is less than 100. And on each loop iteration, we're going to increase by 1, as you can see there. We're going to open up in our curly braces, and we will close them below the place where we add the element to body. And so I'm going to go ahead and indent this so that it reads better. To go ahead and move all the way there. And as you can see there, we have the for loop. Now there's a couple of modifications we need to make. If we were to run this again, all of those 100 new shapes would be placed on top of each other. So we would not be able to see anything but one shape. So we want to place them in random locations. Now, in order to do that, we want to make sure that they are within our visible area within the window in the browser. And so we're going to define here a couple of variables. The first one is going to be width, and we are going to access some of the information on the browser window. And what we're going to access is inner width. And then we're going to access or create a variable called height. We will do the same thing, access the window properties, and then we will enter here inner height. So that gives us our span for the horizontal and our span also for the vertical. Then we want to create a couple of coordinates. I'm going to call them X and Y. And we're going to take a random location within this width and in this height. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply times a random number here. And we're going to use the random function that is part of JavaScript, like that. And I'm then going to do the same thing for Y, except I'm going to enter height. And then I'm going to multiply times a random number as well. Now there's a couple more changes we want to make. First, we want to make our shapes smaller because they're too big at 200. And we also want to vary the location. And so we're going to concatenate the X value plus pixel because we must enter a number plus pixel. And so I'm going to note that there now. So we have shapes, circular shapes of 20 pixels, and we're placing those shapes at random locations. We're going to add 100 of them. All of them are green. I'm going to go ahead and save the file, and I'm going to drag it into the browser. And if I did not make any mistakes, we should see them. And yes, you can see there the shapes. We could saturate this with 1,000. I'm going to go ahead and reload the page, and you can see there. And if I reload the file, you can see that the shapes are moving and they are in random locations. In the next exercise, exercise number 4, we're going to build on the code of 3, and we're going to add those shapes, but we're going to now vary the color. So we're going to use the exact same code as before. Go ahead and paste it. And the only additional thing that we're going to do is that we're going to vary the color. Now, since you've seen already how to do the random or how to use the random function, I'm simply going to paste here the block of code that creates random colors. And I will talk, or I will comment on what's taking place here. As you can see here, this part is simply 255 from the RGB values between 1 and 255 for red, green, and blue. And then we're multiplying that times a random number, and then we're simply rounding it with the function of floor. Now we do that for red, green, and blue. And then we have one more value that is simply the opacity that we're going to create this color at. We then define it within one string, and this is just a convention of browsers, and this is how you define a color plus an opacity. And once we do that, we need to set our background to that value, right? So we have color here, and now I'm going to add color to the div. So that is color. Now we're going to go ahead and save it, and let's go ahead and load that file. That is 04. And you can see there that we get the nice little shapes, and we're varying the opacity. There's a lot of different colors as well. If I reload my page, you can see there that they are moving around about randomly, and the colors are changing as well. So this is very much the same code that we had on example number 3, with the exception of this part where we define a random color and then the assignment that we make to the background property within the div on line 30. Now in the last example, example number 5, we're going to simulate the movement of one of these shapes. I'm going to go ahead and delete the comments here, and I'm going to use the shape that we created on example number 1, and we're now going to write some script to move this shape. So I'm going to go ahead and enter a script tag. Then within it, I want to declare a few variables. The first one is velocity. This is going to be the increment at which the ball will move, and I will do it on every time click, and we'll talk about a timer in a minute. I will move it by 5 pixels. I'm then going to enter a position, an initial position, which in this case I'll be 0, and that'll keep track of where I am as well. The next thing that I want to do is I want to get a handle. Now a handle in this case on the tag that is defined on line 1. But since I have not given it an ID, I need to give it an ID, because in this case, I'm going to get a handle on it by ID. And I'm simply going to call this, and I should use double quotes because that's the convention for tags. I'm going to call it ball. So the way in which we get a handle on it, we'll declare a variable called ball. And then we will use the document, and we will get a hold of the element by ID. So get element by ID, and then we'll give it the name of the ID. In this case, it's ball. And at that point, we defined a velocity, a position, or a variable that will track the position, and we have a handle on the ball tag, which is the one defined on line 1. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is that we need to write a timer that will execute a set of operations that will move the ball along. So let's start off by creating the timer, and we'll use set interval. There's a couple of timers that can be, there's a couple of timers within JavaScript. The other one is set timeout, but for this one, we'll use set interval. And inside of it, we define a function that will fire every set number of milliseconds. In this case, it's going to be every 100 milliseconds. Inside of it, we're going to add to the position, and it's going to be position plus the velocity. And then we're going to set the style horizontal position on the ball. So in this case, style.left. And then we're going to take the position and add pixel to it, just like we did before when we were creating shapes. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that and review what we've done. We've created a shape on line 1, although it goes all the way to line 9. Then we created a couple of variables, a velocity, a position. We got a handle on that shape that we created on the HTML side. We then created a timer. Every 100 milliseconds, this timer is going to fire. Every time it fires, is going to take whatever position is at and add to that the velocity. And then that position, we're going to add to it px for the pixel position, and we'll assign that to the ball style left. So let's go ahead and run this and on the page and see if we can get it to move. I'm going to go ahead, and let me change my size. Actually, that's okay. Let me leave it that size. I'm going to go ahead and carry over 5, and you can see there that it's moving across the screen. So that's pretty cool. You can have some fun there playing through a number of scenarios like I mentioned in class. But that's pretty much it for the exercises. There's one more file that I have here. And just to review, we first created a shape. We did that in a declarative way within HTML. Then we did the same thing programmatically. We placed it then at random locations. We varied the color. And ultimately, we then created a simulation of movement with the ball moving across the screen in only the horizontal direction. So go ahead and try these out. It's fun to play with a graphical environment.